following podcast contains real stories and raw conversations from first responders and military personnel. Some topics may be graphic or triggering. The views expressed by the host and the guests are their own and do not represent any agency or organization. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back to another exciting episode of Beyond the Dispatch. We have a very special guest here today, someone I hold in very high regards, Eric from Blue Grit Radio. How are you doing today, brother?
Dude, I'm money. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Brother, it's our honor, and I know that for a fact. We appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you for taking the time away from your family and your busy work schedule. I know, how life gets. It gets hectic.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I love connecting with you guys off recording and then on recording on my show. So it's like I'm just excited to continue going and growing with people like you in the space that are doing everything positive and constructive for first responder culture.
Man, that means a lot to us. Eric is a commander out in the Seattle land area. Eric, go ahead, tell us a little bit about yourself, brother.
Yeah, for sure. So born in Memphis, but largely grew up in the Pacific Northwest, outside of Seattle in the suburbs. And so coming up, pretty shy kid, raised pretty traditionally. Like my parents immigrated from China and Taiwan. That story is relevant to me, just kind of, as much as like discord we have, like I'm so grateful to be in this country. I feel like in a lot of ways, like if you're born here, you do win. You won to some degree, and like the opportunities you have. But then also like looking back, and we'll get to this, like my call to service. I was raised pretty traditional to follow all the stereotypical types of career goals. Like my parents would have loved me to be a doctor or a lawyer or like do computer science. And I actually tried some of those courses, growing up, but ultimately like it wasn't my thing. I didn't feel like the pull to like purpose there. And it really wasn't until college where I think I came into my own and then realized like, no, I wanted to do this like literal boots on the ground type of service. And that's what led me to first responder work and testing for police and fire. So, a little nod to you, Carrie. Like I threw my name in both hats, and police is where I ended up.
Well, like they say, all cops are just failed firemen.
In my case, it's true. Like I just did a speaking engagement
his too.
in Orlando, and it was like a wellness summit, and I got a little nervous because I was like, man, this is almost all firefighters. Like it's a second alarm project. That's the base of where they came up. But I'm like, dude, I'm talking about first responder wellness. It translates to everyone. And a lot of the slides were specifically geared towards fire. But afterwards, like one of the coordinators did this kind of like Facebook Live thing. And he's like, hey, so how was that? Because he knew my story. He's like, how was that? How much harder was the fire exam than the police one? And I'm like, well, that's funny because same private company did both. I got a 93 on fire. I got an 81 on police. I got one rejection letter from fire and no interviews just off the bat. And then I had every interview I could imagine for police. I was like, so that probably says a lot, like where the bar is set. You need an A+ to be a fire candidate back then. So,
right.
Shout out to you firefighters and your math, your tricky math.
Right. Tricky. I actually saw that video you put up on your page. It was funny. I was cracking up listening to it.
Yeah. No regrets. I mean, it's not a regret. I didn't have the option, to be honest. When I started, I was super excited to try both, and not knowing anyone in either, kind of in my family circles or friends, I was like, man, I guess I'm gonna try to do this like super archetypical like hero type of role. Like let's just do our best kind of thing, and I didn't go. They have prep courses, right? You could go to a technical college and pay to do the practice tests, physical, right? So you're lifting ladders and all that. And as I talked with you guys, like I was painting houses in college, so I was just trying to emulate different things. I remember putting like all these goofy weights and things in like a hiking backpack, and then I didn't want to go to the gym with this and look like that guy, so I just ran up and down the stairs of my fraternity for the step mill, because I'm like, if I can run up the stairs for X number of minutes, that's way harder than walking at a certain pace. And I didn't know what that pace was.
Right.
That actually so easy because I prepped. So
yeah, that actually resonates with me because when I was testing for the SWAT team, I put on, it's like a weighted vest from like, I think Rogue sells it. That's like a 10 pound in the back, 10 pound in the front, and it looks like a plate carrier. And I'm running through like trails, and people will probably see me like, what is this psycho doing? Like he's running with a fucking plate carrier.
Yeah. Yeah, you see it. I mean, that's like probably $300 for that rig.
Right.
But yeah, I just threw a bunch of crap in an old backpack. So, um, no, I mean, I wouldn't have it any other way. I
Right.
mean, like shout out to firefighters. I appreciate what you do, but maybe because I'm coming up on 40, like thinking about sleep disruption, like I would not trade my lifestyle now for the career struggles of firefighters and working 24 to 72-hour shifts. Like, not my thing. As a young man, sounds really cool, but now
Right.
I'm like, I'm good.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, bro. You say you're 40, and I said this to you before. You do not look 40. You aged like a fine wine, brother. You look great,
Thank
man.
you.
And
Well, I started, yeah, it's how I started. I think I have photos on my social media, like when I was a new recruit, like I was 21, but I looked like I was 17. And so being a new cop, even out of field training, when people be like, you know, people be mouthing off, right, talking shit, and they're like, "Well, how the f old are you? Like, you look like you're 17," and like they weren't
right,
wrong. Like,
right,
I absolutely. One time, this guy was wasted, and I think he fought us and that whole thing, and he just mouthing off would not stop. We all know,
yeah, oh yeah,
Dom, you know what that's like, and
been
Carrie,
there.
you've probably been alongside the guys after you do the first aid, and this
Yeah,
guy just would not stop. Like, I respect the guy that's like, you won, you caught me,
hmm
and then now we can just be cordial. Like we can talk about music, we can have a nice chat on the way to jail. But he could not stop, and he's just like every slur and like
of course.
terrible word he could think of. He's like, "How old are you?" And starts talking, like trying to make fun of me for my age. He's like, "You're 17. You're a teenager. You're nothing. You punk, a hole like
Right.
teenager." And I'm like, "You're right." And he stopped, like cold, like he's wasted, but he stopped. He's like, "What?" I'm like, "I am. He's like, "How old are you?" And he got really serious. I'm like, "I'm 17." And then he stares at me. He's like, "You're messing with me." I'm like, "No." He's like, "You're effing with me." I'm like, "No." And he gets so like solemn. He's like, "My lord, you're just a kid. You don't know, like you don't even know. You're just a kid. My lord, I'm so sorry." And he just starts apologizing for talking the way he was, because now he thinks he was like basically just running his mouth at a minor. And I was
Right.
like,
Yeah.
it's part of a recruit process. I'm like a volunteer almost. I'm just like a recruit. And he's just like, "Oh my lord."
Dude, you fucked with
And
that guy's OODA
I
loop.
just let him own it. Yeah.
Yeah, you fucked with that dude's OODA loop for sure. Like
Yeah.
he was on set on that story, and then you fucked with his OODA
He was
loop,
so
and
quiet then. Yeah. Yeah.
That's so funny.
you put that CD on skip, brother. Oh man, so talking about your early career, let's get into it, man. So your parents wanted you to go to be a doctor or IT, and honestly, you're talking with you on the phone through your podcast. You're definitely articulate. You're definitely smart enough to do either of those fields. You chose to be a civil servant and give back to the community, man. So like, tell me about your early on police career.
Yeah, man. So I appreciate the compliment. I don't know if I'm smart, the right kind of smart enough, and maybe that's why I took a turn. In college, like I ended up being much more interested in social science and ended up majoring with political science, because I was fascinated learning maybe more about society, and my reading and writing was definitely better than like my technical, I suppose, like math and science. Although I was super studious and academic as a kid, but yeah, so getting into police work, that was my strength. Like I could hit the books. It was very like cognitive in my head in a lot of ways, like the overthinker that a lot of people maybe in any service can recognize. Like if you let your brain get in the way of it, like you kind of suppress the intuition. And so that was a bit of my struggle, like not knowing, I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't know much about anything outside of learning what I did in academy about police work, right? So um, early FTO was kind of a struggle, and I share a lot about that because a lot of my content is geared towards people helping them get in and get hired and kind of get on their way. That mentorship aspect that is really rewarding for me. But once I learned how to get out of my own way and just like trust yourself to agree, like learn how that okay or good decision is way better now than a more ideal or best situation way later. That's where I really took off. So it was like that early pivot phase one FTO. I was just like floundering, and all of a sudden talking to some cops and getting some like positive nudges just to like trust myself. I catapulted off of that, and then the rest of field training was super easy. Certainly, like I look back and I think about this, kind of comically, but I remember being like this like goofy baby cop because I think all of us are, but literally after a few years we forget.
Yeah.
We like selectively forget and we're like, who the heck are these new people? I'm like, dude, like you and I were literally in the wrong jurisdiction and you booted a door that we didn't have legality to go into. Luckily it was a vacant and there's nothing going on, right? Like I've definitely like whether we had probable cause and stuff like this is stuff that the public doesn't like to hear, but
Right.
it was definitely way more true back then. I'll say for my own experience, I feel like a lot the training is more dialed in. We talk about legal authority way more like with our brand new cops, and I remember having those conversations. Like I didn't we talked about case law, but I'm like, what does that even mean
Right.
early on? So all to say, yeah, we did goofy things, tactical blunders, all that, like bad searches, meaning like not thorough searches.
Right.
But all to say, I chose my agency because it was like the real deal as I perceived it, and it has been. I grew up in a more affluent suburb outside of Seattle, and although I think some exposure to like real worldness going to school in Seattle and seeing a lot of crime, a lot of drugs, having to contend with how you feel in your neighborhood, friends and, female friends from school having to walk home past like people in like mental health crisis and what that looks like. That made me want to go do like quote unquote the real deal. Like I didn't want to police in like a chill suburb. I want to deal with gangs. I want to learn about like drugs and kind of I guess get those legit notches on my belt on like doing real police work. And so that's what led me to my agency where I've been ever since, coming up on 18 years.
Wow. So I was thinking about something when you were talking about the goofy stuff when you're early on in your career, and it kind of reminds me of a saying that we had in our department, and we had a handful of older guys that were going off, and they just had like really weird hangups with things. Right? We'd say, "Oh, it's '90s guy mentality," but it's like totally true. Like if you look at policing and the fire service and like how it's kind of progressed, like you have there's just like this weird time period, like the 90s and early 2000s. And it just like you see it exiting now, but totally like, starting when you did, I'm sure you saw a lot of that. A lot of those guys that were brought up in that era of like, no, this is the way we do it. And it's like, well, wait, what, why? Like, what are we thinking about here? Like,
Right.
that's not okay.
Right.
But total, like, well, you've seen quite the change, I'm sure, in policing.
Yeah.
Because
I think that,
you started. Well, I'm sorry to cut you off, but you started in '07, correct?
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Continue. I didn't mean to cut you off. I
Oh, just to
apologize.
say, yeah, I was thinking like 90s is like, I was a 90s kid in a way. But yeah, the cops that were like starting up in the 90s, and for sure, like that, the huge shift of like, hey, you're the police and you say what goes, and the police is the police, and you don't owe anyone any explanations. Ask, tell, make. Um, I was trained in that environment, and so like when we look at the last few years, like was that the best way for our goal and like being part of and supporting the community? Like I don't think so, right? I think that there's a middle ground, and I think that we're
Right.
finding that in current times. And I'm not at all trying to get political. I'm just trying to say like the majority of the cops out there are like, if you stuck through this, like you're trying to do your best, right? So
Right.
we do have open ears, we do have open minds, but it is to say that the people that struggled the most, kind of with Carrie saying like, I was taught this way, like that like discord was just an inflexibility, and that's like I think that's who really struggled the most is kind of the people that are like mid-career or maybe they've passed the midpoint, because a lot of people with 5 or 10 in fewer years are like, man, I'm young enough to go do something else, and a lot of people did in droves, right? And
Right.
no judgment, like I've said that like more times than I can count on recording, especially in recruiting conversations, but to say, hey, if you did 5 years or fewer, like with the right intention and the right values, like thank you. We should look at it like a military service, whether you're, a dispatcher or a firefighter, and you did it for like 3 or 4 years, and it really wasn't your thing. Like, cool, you literally made the community way safer for 3 to 4 years. So I think that we're moving more towards that as far as like these types of careers, especially with just how the generations are looking at careers and vocations.
Yeah, I agree with you. And just from what you've accomplished in your career, I mean, hats off to you, brother. You are changing law enforcement, definitely for your department, but I mean, with your platform as well. I appreciate that because the old school mentality, just like you said, like there has to be like a middle ground. Like, yes, you do need some of it. There's things you can take from it. And it's kind of like FTO in a sense, right? Where you have so many FTOs where you can learn something from everyone. Not you're not going to take everything from that person because there's some things you probably don't like, right? But you can take the bits and pieces from that person and then move it to the next stage. Take bits and pieces from that person, move it to the next stage, and then it kind of you develop your own self as a police officer.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. That's kind of like what I wanted to do with my department, and that's why I started like a mentor program because, you know, you get these kids off the street, and I say kids, but you know they're 21 years old, but what do they really know about law enforcement? Not much. You know, what do they really know about life? You know, just probably some 2 or 3 things about college, and that's it. So you give them like a police officer or a veteran officer who's been on the streets, who's done it. They can learn from that person, and you use them as like a backer. Like, hey man, listen, I had this call. How would you handle it? And it really kind of helps out in the long run, and you start to develop your department from the ground up, right? And I always wanted to treat my department like as a family because you are, in a sense. You might hate that person, but guess who's coming when shit hits the fan? It's that person you hate. So you have like a mutual respect for everyone you deal with. And you're doing that, man. And you know, reluctantly, you kind of got pushed into the position you're in. But I mean, look where you're at now, man. Like you're a commander at your police department. You have your platform. You're thriving. You're recruiting guys, and you're developing guys the right way that they should be developed. And just like you said, you didn't know anything about case law when you first started. Like no one sat down and took that time with you to explain it, right? It's just like figure it out on your own. Figure it out on your own. But that's old school mentality. That's not how things can be done. Like you can really develop your officers into something great, and then that just and again reflects for your department.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, that's really tall praise, and I think that you're absolutely right. Like mentorship is like the thing, and that's what you know, in a form like you're doing that, you guys with your project and sharing story and insights and wisdom, right? So like people can learn from our triumphs and from our missteps and all of that, everything in between, and just allowing more people to see and hear that at scale. Um, yeah, I think it means everything, and having somebody to go to like that security blanket so you're not feeling dumb or feeling penalized going to the Sarge. And really, the Sarge has other things to do at
Right.
times. Like, sure, you should access your leaders for clarity and direction, but probably not all the time, right? You go to your partner, go to the senior officer on your
Right.
crew, and then sometimes even early on, like there's those official relationships, like your chain of command, but then there's also just I mean, we've utilized mentorship alongside peer support just to say, hey, like you might just have some really like off the wall question. Like, why don't you ask somebody that it's not going to be like your trainer being like, did you just ask me that? Like,
Right.
or this is it's a hugely different way to like run your life, right? And so if you're grappling with like, man, like I don't know how to talk to my my significant other about this thing, or how much do I talk about, then you have someone that's been in the saddle for 5, 6, whatever years. So like, hey, that's a great question. That comes up a lot. And so
Yeah.
it's more like a peer support format where you're like, it's more just personal, and it's more adaptive and wellness focused. And it might be offering insight like, yeah, I literally had a conversation with my spouse about, hey, like how much is there an amount that you want to hear about, or is
Right.
there an amount you don't want to hear about? Because I defer this way, but I'm not trying to box you out, and I'm also not trying to burden you with these traumatic events. And you literally talk about talking about it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of thinking about this. You were talking about mentorship, or you two were. I would say not to, I really don't know how the Leo world is with it, but like in the fire service, I feel like it's kind of something we've got dialed in pretty well as far as like developing new guys. Cause it's when you come onto a fire department, obviously you're on probation for a year, right? And even if you've been a fireman for numerous years somewhere else, everywhere has their way of doing it, right? So a lot of like my department where I started, the day you get hired and you go on shift, you get assigned mentors. So it's 2 dudes that, generally have experience. They try to split it up. One guy is kind of like younger or lower on the totem pole, more junior, and they'll try to get a more senior guy. So you get both aspects, right? And they take you through completing your book with skills and, things you have to prove that you can do and know and whatnot. And that's like where you start. If you have questions, if you have issues, you go to those guys. And then you have the rest of your shift, right? Like, they might tell you, like, don't ask this guy questions because he's going to tell you the wrong answer. But you do have that group to draw from. Finally, like, when it comes to just like everyday things, you have your senior blue shirt or your barn boss, depending on how they label that at your department. And he's the guy that's been, 16 years on the job. He's grizzly and rough around the edges and spends his day in the recliner. But if he says, we're washing the rigs right now, you go and wash the rigs, and he kind of gives you that idea, right? And so you go through all those steps before you burden your officer with questions. And it, like, you get a lot of different aspects of how to complete tasks and, like, ideas and stuff. And I don't know, it's just kind of like a good mentorship program. I learned a lot doing it. And I know I was looking forward to being a mentor, actually. So
yeah,
I think it's a cool deal.
Yeah, it's actually, it's probably one of the most rewarding things for me, right? Because I use an analogy of, one of the worst mistakes you can make is not learning from somebody else's mistakes or yourself, right?
Sure.
So someone already made that mistake for you. Someone already lived that lesson for you. So why not try and avoid that in the future? That's one less mistake you have to make, and you can grow from it.
Yeah, I love that. And what it makes me think about is like the difference between formal leadership and informal leadership. And oftentimes they're just as critical. In some ways, like informal leaders are that much more impactful and influential because no one has to listen to them. They listen to them because they want to, right? So you just have that organic followership because they're doing and saying the right things the right way.
Right. Right. I mean, like, perfect example. Like, look at how the military does it, and you have all those levels of formal and informal leadership. I mean, I guess technically it's all formal because it's all at rank, but, a non-com is not a commissioned officer, so it's seen as a little differently, I guess. But I feel like we're talking a ton right now.
So tell us.
I love it.
Yeah, man. Tell us about your career path. Like, so you started out in patrol. How was patrol, and then kind of just talk us through your progressions after patrol.
Yeah, for sure. So patrol was it's busy. Like I said, high crime area, lots of gangs, lots of violence, drugs. And I say that, and we're getting close to 20 years ago, which is kind of nuts, but it is like so much more so now. And so I
Right.
really like on the peer support part, which is like the majority of my career, I've been very involved with peer support, and I'm a huge advocate for that.
Same.
I do like really feel for my people out there, and I think most supervisors get it, and hopefully most line level don't take this the wrong way. But when you're a supervisor, it's almost like your kids are out there, especially when you're older, right? So you're like your baby cops, your baby firefighters are like you want them to be good. You really start to feel for them, and you worry about you can't be there, kind of like you send your kids off to school. You can't be there. You hope that you've given them the framework that they can navigate the things they have to in the right ways. And so I felt that as a sergeant. Kind of fast forwarding, but I'm not going to be the first one on scene all the time.
Right.
But I have to trust that we're having the right conversations. They're supporting each other the right way until I get there or offer what I can. And now even more so, like basically, I'm a desk jockey. And so I see my sergeants. I have so much trust and belief in them, but I'm like, it's a little bit of like Jesus take the wheel. Like I have to trust them.
Right.
And,
True.
like, I can't be there. Yeah, I can't. I got to just like release that control. But yeah, cutting back. So largely patrol based. So I got into peer support early on. I became a pretty young FTO, and I also got on our civil disturbance unit, which is a regional team. Really just activated for protests, sometimes demonstrations, not all violent. Usually a lot of standby for people that have worked those types of details. But then it did become, violent riots later in my career, with May Day, downtown Seattle, and after the death of George Floyd. But I got into canine work. I talked about how I was pretty analytical and as a young man, and a lot of people recognize, I suppose, that trait. Certain supervisors saying like, "Hey, you should think about detectives. You'd be really good. You're like in the weeds," and I could totally see it. And I was like, "Oh, maybe." But as I did patrol work and I got in the foot chases and I got in the scraps, I was like, this is not how I grew up, right? I was
Right.
like, this is the stuff. Like, this
Yeah.
is the fun stuff. I loved when people tried to run from me, and uh, quite a bit leaner, but pretty quick. And so I was like, I love that. Like, I love the thrill. I was never an adrenaline junkie growing up, but I found like the taste for it, I suppose, and the high speed chases. And so that's what shifted my career interest towards canine, because with canine, like a tracking dog, you're getting and you have the opportunity to track down and chase the people that otherwise would have gotten away. And so that was the kind of flip for me, getting towards and into that work and building my resume and training, all that. Like, I just realized I had to be the best physical, I suppose, example of myself to do all that work and lift a heavy dog and
Yeah.
have the endurance and the strength and agility and durability. So I got really into fitness and nutrition, and that's kind of the foundation of my social media years later. Is just trying to put out positive information on that. So I talked about peer support, like the mental emotional side, and then that's where in my career, about 5-6 years in, I got really into like the physical health side of things. Um, After doing canine for a number of years, took the sergeant's test and promoted to street sergeant, and then a few different units after a handful of years there. So street sergeant in 2019, 2020, obviously really tough, frustrating times, challenging times. But then our neighborhood response team, which is more like long-term problem solving in the neighborhood and community education, and then rolling that right into recruiting, because we had just this dire need in 2021 and following, of course, as we all
Right.
know.
Yeah.
Doing that for a couple of years and a short stint training sergeant, and then promoting to commander, which is for us, it's like a lieutenant, it's mid management, that kind of thing.
Very cool, man.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You and I have I guess a tie in a way. I was a fireball once, and you were a fireball once. So I kind of want to roll into that story and what happened, what went down with you, because I know it sounded like a
Yeah.
pretty harrowing experience.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, we have our life or career kind of events, and this was a big one for me. I call it one of my like closest calls, certainly. But in essence, like it was when I was working canine, and I got called in on time off because a dude tried to assault a cop, and then he took off running, and he was accessing a firearm as he ran. And it was like Sunday midday in the summer, pretty crowded shopping area, and so they locked the whole place down. I came in, I grabbed my dog, came in, and we started tracking this guy.
Real
We
quick
tracked
though,
him for a couple.
I don't mean to cut you off,
Sorry,
brother,
bro.
but like,
Oh yeah.
can you talk about just the mental picture? Because I know me personally, whenever I hear an officer call for additional units, you can like just tell in their voice of what kind of situation they're in, or just like an officer hurt in general. What goes through your mind at that point in time?
Yeah, man, it's chills. You think about what that impact means and how cryptic that is when you hear something. I mean, I was at home, but I got a call on my phone. I was actually about to get my hair cut. So the crazy thing, and I think things happen for a reason. And we talked like on call. It was pre having like a department phone. There wasn't like a dramatic expectation that I'm always like gonna come in, but just like they'll try to find like the closest dog, and they probably would have just kept calling other handlers in the area, but yeah, like for whatever reason, like I was like, hold on, and like kind of move my head and get my phone from under the thing, and Sarge is telling me, hey, this is what went down. Everyone's okay, but like we got to find this guy. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna head home and be on my way. But kind of your question too, like one thing that came up and specific to this incident too is that there was a time, and I'm fast forwarding, so the intrigue's either building or just doing some awkward things. But um, there was a time when someone called out officer down, and even saying those words, or every time I hear them, especially when I say something, I feel this uh intrinsic like chill.
Yeah.
And talking like the stress debrief and meeting the dispatchers, like so many dispatchers, their name, their voice, but then like
Right.
meeting them and having them have this visceral emotional reaction when they get to see you, a week or two later, and they like grab you and hug you, and you feel that like love and that care because they're like the parents in a way too, right? Like
Yeah.
they are literally trying to guide you. And then I I posted on this lately, but it was recognizing like dispatch week, right? Or dispatchers recognizing them, but it's almost like you're on the phone with someone you care about, and they're like, "Holy shit!" Like, well,
Yeah.
I gotta go, and there's like stress, and there's like something's going down. They hang up, and you're just on the other line, just like, what is happening, and you don't get to know for a long time. And you don't get to know if it's going to turn out a good way or not. And so dispatchers, whether it's for fire, for police, like they know factually that you're going into these really hairy situations, and they don't get to know what happens until later.
Yeah.
That it all resolved, and usually they have all these questions and blanks that they can't really fill in unless they get to talk to someone.
Yeah, and that
Um,
that hits home for me because when I met my dispatcher or talked to him on the phone, like I was almost
oh
in
yeah,
tears. And then another one, she dispatched me for the majority of my career. She came to the hospital and was crying, and afterwards I met her maybe like six not met her, I met her before, but I talked to her in person, and she just gave me the biggest hug, and I was literally about to start sobbing like a baby because they care about you. Those dispatchers, just like you said, like to your younger officers as a sergeant, they're your children in a way. You develop that emotional connection with those officers or firefighters, so it takes a toll on them as well. But continue. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
yeah, no, you're good. I mean, like, there's just this like we eat our own kind of culture in police, and I'm sure fire is very similar in that way. Like we razz each other, and then it gets pretty callous and maybe corrosive at times. But I remember for a long time, like I'd hear different officers, and it was almost like, man, the dispatchers need to know everything. They're so nosy. Like, why do they need like keep blowing
right,
up my MDC, like trying to ask what happened on that call? It's like, well, shoot, like what would you feel like?
right,
You're
exactly,
literally in the dark. They don't get to see it. Um, we're maybe going to a technologically different place where they will be able to see it. So maybe, um, but anyway, yeah. So like the incident tracking, you're working this way, that way. The dog has scent, the dog loses odor, and it's summer. Not crazy hot in my area, but like hot enough. And really, we nailed it down to this like one last area, and it's like it was this landscaping company that was closed because it was the weekend. Um, Fenced in area, this big Quonset hut. So there's a kind of like tarpaulin structure, right? Semi enclosed, like open front, but then roof and then back and sides. And there's all these cabinets and barrels and drums and, riding mower and all this stuff. And we'd been poking around the property for a bit, and it seemed like we weren't really on anything. You got complacent, right? So for the cops, like the vigilance dropped, like there are all these trucks and like lawn clippings and leaves and stuff. And I remember seeing like one cop was up on a truck and like poking like this pile of leaves with like a rake, and we just don't know. We're just checking, right? And it wasn't until like we get close to that Quonset hut, which we probably should have just checked more thoroughly first. But
right,
hindsight 2020, the dog's getting pretty gassed. But my dog Kato, he starts picking up speed, and he starts picking up. He becomes animated, as we say in canine, and he shoves his head under that riding mower. And my initial thing was like, fooey that, like I'm about to like grab this leash and like correct him, because I think the way he is, like he's so hot on this out of no for apparently no reason, because I was so complacent after hours in the sun. I thought that he was on an animal, which happens, right?
right.
And so I'm like, kid, when I move in, and then he kind of shimmies out, and in his mouth is this like fatigue kind of jacket. And then I remember seeing the jacket and being like, oh dang. And then I heard like simultaneously the main primary cop is like, that's the dude's jacket. And then all of a sudden, like our vigilance goes like, whoop, and everyone's
Yeah,
just like on high alert again, right? So at this point, it was me, K9, a couple officers, um, one of which had an AR, so a rifle, luckily. And so because the dude was armed, we keep checking, and one of the officers that was with me used to be a canine as well, and so he sees what's happening. And I was a not a super experienced handler at the time. I think I had a couple years in, and he sees like my dog's kind of working back and forth, and he can't get behind this area, and there's like this big metal cabinet, and there's these drums. So he moves up to go move one of the drums, and as he does that, I see him, and I see this head like pop up and then dip back down, and he goes, show me your hands, show me your hands. And then the next thing is just this pop, 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 pop. And those pops were gunfire. And a lot of those pops were mine included, right? So by then, we'd already drawn down. When I saw the guy's head, I'd drawn my pistol too. And then everyone was just like, shots fired, and then we're off to the races. And so in that succession, like my own memory, and we know like time distortion, all these things with critical stress, but I heard pop, 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 and boom. And then all of a sudden, the foreshadowing of the fireball is like I just see this fireball, like this wall of flame moving toward me, and all I could do at the moment was just dip my head. I had a forward ball cap at the time. Very fortunate for that. Very fortunate I had shaggy hair. I didn't have like slicked hair like I did more days than not. And I brought my arms up, and this fire just like passed over me, like it completely enveloped me. And I remember being at that time, and we talked about mindset on when you guys came on my show, but like I would have loved to. I would love to share that I was like, indomitable in my whole career, just being like, yeah, nothing's gonna take me out, nothing's gonna kill me, because all
Right.
the things that we learn in academy, like it's never over. But I was like, well, that's a good run. Shit,
That
there's some
escalated
things I
quickly.
wanted to do in life, and yeah, like I was like, well, shoot. And then I remember just being intensely hot, like excruciatingly painfully hot, and then just kind of being disoriented and trying to walk out of the fire. Like I kind of walked this big circle, and then before long, I was like, wait, the fire's kind of gone, but I'm still like in excruciating like hot pain. But then I kind of snap out of it, and I'm like, oh, this isn't done. And so I kind of get my wits about. I'm like, where is this dude? Where is this dude? Meanwhile, everything's on fire, right? Everything that is around us, like this hut's like lighting up, all this popping and hissing, and uh, the stuff that was under the hut. And I see one of my officers like crawling, literally just kind of army crawling, like wincing in pain. So I grab him, another guy grabs him. We kind of like just egress and move out from away from the hut, and we start checking him up. And we're trying to looking around. They're like, is this guy in there? Is he like burned down? Is he shot up? Like we don't really know. Start checking the guy, the officer, and fortunately, he was not shot. Doing the whole rake and ripped his vest off. He was reacting to the pain of the fire as well. And people were like, "Is the dude down? Where is he at? Where's your dog?" And then at that moment, I was like, I had this pause where I was like, I don't even want to call him because he ain't coming. Like, there's no freaking way.
Right.
Everything's on fire, and people are like having all the questions I just said, but also like, we need to get the f out of here. Like, this is not good. Like, lawn stuff. Like, is there just tons of fertilizer? Like, I'm no firefighter, but curious like where Carrie's head is like at,
Yeah.
like as far as
Oh,
like
yeah.
let's get away. There's vehicles, there's gasoline, there's drums of who knows what. As we start moving, trying to gather each other around, I hear again like, show me your hands, and the dude is emerging from the flames, kind of lumbering over, and he starts moving towards the gate, and a couple of us engage him in gunfire again.
Ugh.
Case law and legality supported. But
Right.
there was actually an officer on the outside too that had an AR and took him out. So suspect down, we cuffed him for training, and then I start calling for my dog Kato, and fully believing that he was not going to come. We all kind of get together, and sure enough, like I joke like later on like that Kato had 9 lives, and one of them served him well that day, because he comes like kind of lumbering over, all goofy, tongue hanging out, like a crazy, like probably exactly what we were thinking, like what the heck just happened. He just had like a few singed furs.
Thank God.
All in all, pretty good. So we got out, and it wasn't until getting to the hospital, like my arms look pretty normal, and then one starts to get dark, and then they both like just my forearms just blister up like
I bet.
chicken skin in a broiler. Pretty gnarly. Sorry for the details, but super fortunate that was basically extending my injuries. Second degree burns on my arms, and then my hair like barely singed around my ear, a couple eyelashes like just barely, and like one eyebrow like barely. And so I'm like, that is freaking nuts.
Insane.
But I say like a pivotal time in my life, because like after that, and I know post traumatic stress, you have all kinds of reactions that are all kinds of normal reactions within the scope of extremely abnormal things. Um, but I was just like high on life, right? Like I basically felt like I had a second lease, and like nothing was going to take away from like that gratitude, that extreme gratitude that I was like, man, I thought like I was all in and that was it. I
Right.
thought I was, lost my hand, but I get to keep playing.
Yeah. It definitely gives you appreciation in a sense.
Yeah, yeah, it did for me, and I know it's not for everyone. Just and it, man, I know we're gonna get to talk about like my approach and my belief in wellness and health, and like really why I do the podcast and Blue Grit Wellness, but it really came from like years of people like ask me why I thought I handled that well, and other things like other challenges for sure, like maybe not as well, but like generally try to be a pretty positive dude, and people asking me like why that is. And the simple math is like because I have really good support systems, like because I take care of my health as best I can for the time, and it makes a difference. Like that's literally what has built my resilience or grit, um, and helping navigate all the challenges that just come with this type of life and career.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and you've definitely done that, brother. I mean, your show is phenomenal. But before we get to your show, I want to touch on topic of you losing someone kind of close to you or very close to you. Can you tell us a little bit about that incident?
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, that's Diego, my buddy. He's one of my closest friends from police work. And I had really close friends in police work. Like it was, my college buddies and then my cop buddies. And he was someone that I worked with a lot, on a lot of these types of canine calls. Not that one, but certainly some others. We were both involved in peer support. And I remember a time that, I almost got hit by a car, trying to grab the guy out of the car. And, it was after a failed deployment, right? The guy had all these felony warrants. He was leaving a jewelry store after like with a stolen, trying to pawn like some stolen jewelry that the person recognized and got his name and ID. But anyway, he's like going back to his car, and I tried to send Cato on the deployment, but he made it to his car first, and he shut the door, and I was at his like at the A pillar right by the side mirror.
Hmm.
Um, and I start challenging him at gunpoint, right? Like stop the car, stop the car. And he starts putting it into drive, and I'm like, we're not doing this. He starts kind of turning the wheel toward me, and that was another moment where I was like, crap, what is about to happen? And my gut instinct was to push off the car, let it go, and luckily I did, because that that car took off over planter beds and curbs and all that, and it hit a pole, and where what was left behind was part of the car, including the side mirror that I was like hugging, right? So I connected that I would have been smushed in that pole. And the comical aspect of the car taking off in the intersection, my dog trying to chase the car, like good boy, come back, don't get hit by the car,
Right, right.
trying to corral him back, and yeah, rush hour traffic, and then not finding the car, and we kept getting calls for this like darked out car. It was kind of dusk and that time of year, and going up through our north end, and I was trying to chase this car down and find it, because I was like, he's gonna dump the car, he's gonna dump the car, he's not gonna stay on the highway that long. And my buddy Diego, like he kept like hitting me up, like blowing up my computer and texting me. He's like, hey, where you at? Where you at? And I'm like, dude, like leave me, like help me find this car, kind of thing.
Right.
He's like, when you're done, come find me. I'll be here, like kind of in the north end. And basically, like I park my car, and I'm like, dude, what do you want that's so important? And he like literally just wanted to check on me, because he heard my voice, and we talked about that earlier, right? You hear
Yeah.
that tone in an officer, and that's like the epitome of peer support. It's just knowing your people, right? And having that awareness and that care. Um, but it was so much more than that for me. His example was, that happy-go-lucky life of the party, right? He's like screaming in the station, like, let's go get this MF, right? Like he would just pick everybody up, but also like beyond just like tenacious police work, like all the community engagement stuff. Like he really cared about that. Solid dad, uh, family man, and he would drag me into like community engagement stuff with my dog even, and I was like not into it. I just wanted to catch bad guys, but it was so important, and I an avid supporter of that, like public interfacing, um, as well, a lot because of example. But one night, I had promoted a sergeant at this time. I was a new sergeant, and I actually wasn't working. I had worked an off-duty detail, and I was trying to get out of there before something happened, right? But that night something happened, and there was basically this shooting kind of incident with a bunch of drunk, idiots. And one of the suspect vehicles, was picked up, and officers trying to pursue it. Diego tries to lay, stop sticks, spike strips, and he gets caught in a bad spot, and so he gets killed that night. And so that was just, absolutely catastrophic for my agency and the region. He was a hostage negotiator. He was a peer support dude. He was on our civil disturbance unit. So it was so much more than just like our PD. It was like all of the neighboring PDs. Like he was the kind of guy that like everyone felt like he was like one of their best friends because that's how he showed up to people.
Yeah.
Um, but it just like many adversities. Like that was one of the hardest times that I had been through in my career. Um, but something I suppose about his example and also just where I was at in life was like recognizing like it was not going to be in vain, and I just tried to metabolize like as much like energy and angst into like positive energy, like raising money, selling hats and shirts and art. Like I grew up drawing and trying to do all this stuff and just trying to like manifest this like good. And so a couple of years later, like I credit him as far as like why I do a lot of this in like the first responder wellness space and leadership and trying to improve our like LE or first responder culture is because of his example. Like, I became a dad long after he was one, but when I think about how I want to be a dad, I think about how I saw him show up and how
Right.
he provided that example for me.
Wow, man. That's powerful, man. It really is. I know that type of guy. You lose a part of that department in the sense when he goes, that a part of that department goes with him. That everyone loves him, everyone wants to be around him. He's that type of guy. How did you navigate that loss, brother? I know that's not an easy thing to deal with. I've lost somebody very close to me, and it destroyed me. How'd you navigate it?
Wasn't easy, and it's like it's a work in progress. I we talk about mindset a lot, and there's always a choice, and I suppose like not easy, and I didn't go there right away, but I suppose that like I'd prefer, and I'm sure he'd prefer for there to be some good and some silver lining. And that sounds absolutely terrible when you lose somebody, like such a bright light, but I can't help but to believe and see, like not just in what I do, but like how much like good like vibes like came from that, and how a lot of people like live their lives differently because of Diego. And so I it almost was like my rational, like my logic seeking brain was like, man, I don't understand the universe. I think that there's powers beyond my comprehension. Like I do believe in a lot of that, like a higher power. And I was like, maybe there's like some calculation in like the universe where like that was like not his peak. Like he couldn't have done more awesome, badass things. Absolutely, he could have. Like there's no reason to believe otherwise. But like that's where his magnifying point would have been the greatest, and that's where he was, not going to be part of this earth anymore. Um, I think was a lot to answer your question more tangibly. Like I mean, we circled the wagons. We got together a lot. We drank a lot. And then I think in some ways, because my life was moving in a slightly different direction, like I had my boys and all that, but we were trying to start a family. We'd been through a lot of adversity with fertility, and Diego was like very much a support mechanism in that, where I was a bit distracted and I had a different role as a sergeant where it wasn't like my crew per se anymore, where I felt a more natural egress to like being at all the drinking events. But I remember talking to one of our best buddies and saying, hey, like, I'm not trying to sound like that dude, and maybe I'm lame and old or whatever, but like, can you please like mind like how people are doing and try to usher, because he was like kind of the event guy. I'm like, try to usher this like not everything needs to be like a blackout thing to celebrate our
Right.
buddy. And that happened in time, right? But also tangibly, like I really leaned in like my family and my wife. But this not just, I'm so grateful for her and like the support mechanisms we have in our family, and we should be if we're watering and investing in that. But I would not the best. It took me a process, but I would talk through like the night I found out, and she found out with me because she woke me up because I was sleeping through my phone, and one of our friends was trying to call me to tell me what had happened. He was at work, and with shift work, like I was down in the basement, like not in our bed, like I was trying to not wake her up and also
Right.
sleep in past when she'd get up. So she came down and she's like, Eric, like, you're getting a call. And she woke me up and I was kind of waking up and my buddy was like, hey man, like, I gotta tell you something. I'm like, what do you gotta tell me? He's like, I want you to take a moment and I, and I share these details because I think it's like very responsible and mature and like very clear and impressive what this officer did, my friend. But he was like, I need you to like take a moment and wake up because I have something really serious to tell you. And he tells me what happened. And I'm just in disarray and I kind of say some things and I hang up the phone. I'm just staring and my wife's like, what just happened? Like she knows something serious, right? And telling her and hearing we I was talking to a dude on the show recently. We were kind of talking about that, like that. Usually, it's like a maternal thing, but it's like that familial, like kind of wail when someone finds out that news, and we've all heard it too many times in
Yeah.
this type of work. But to hear like a version of that I can almost hear right now with my wife, and like 'cause he was he's family to her too.
Yeah.
We hung out all the time. We went on vacation together. And so kind of deviation, but I think there's value in sharing that for others. But as
Very
far
much
as
so.
like talking through it, like I like recounted that day almost daily to my wife, and she was part of our personalities and how we process things. She just like listened. She was just such a good listener.
Yeah.
But it was not not healthy. Like I would just kind of cycle and talk about man, and then and this, and then this, and then we went in, and then it was my butt. And I had been such an avid proponent of peer support, and I'd been growing the program as a sergeant with my recent promotion just because I believed in it. But having like one of our mutual buddies, Trevor, and I've had him on my show numerous times, but he was like, dude, I'm talking to this therapist, and he was not a therapy guy, but he's like, I'm talking to this therapist, and she's great, and I think you should talk to her.
Yeah.
I was like, no, I'm good, man. But it was just that like, why was I so ingrained in this like I'm good thing? I'm a huge fan of peer support. I like avidly like send out department wide emails like therapy's awesome, guys. And meanwhile, I wasn't even doing it right, but
Yeah.
because I think part of it is like I felt like I wasn't there and all these things, and I'm doing fine. Like let's save the first responder, culturally competent therapist that is in high demand for somebody else. And I share that because it's kind of nonsensical, right?
Right.
And
100%.
I think from the outside you could hear that, but just because I wasn't there and just because whatever, like I was mourning somebody that was like basically my brother, and so and as a lot of people, when I've heard a chaplain detail this way, it's like it's not just losing someone like an untimely death, but you're losing them to violence. It's
Yeah.
like you're now like a family victim kind of situation, and so just like calling it what it is, entertaining therapy, and I'm a huge supporter and advocate of therapy, of course, and but also I think one thing that's helpful for me is like it's been I suppose my experience, but some hesitation. I've heard this in others, and I felt it in myself. Was like I didn't want to commit to therapy and to be like, well, I guess this is my life now, where I gotta carve out, this many hours a week or a month for therapy, because it's like it's a very useful tool at times for me in my career, and since then, and then it's like back on the shelf. Like, okay, cool. I've recalibrated and gonna keep doing my thing. And a few years later, some other stress, which might not even be directly work related, comes up, and I'm like, all right, cool. Like let's grab that therapy out of the tool bag
Right.
again. So, um, so therapy was a huge one for me too. In addition to the networks I already had and the support mechanisms I already had.
Yeah. 100%. And those issues, those traumas compound. So just because you walk away from it doesn't mean you can't pick it back up. And I mean, what you said earlier in your statement of why, like, you don't need it, you weren't involved in it. But honestly, you were probably one of the top candidates for it. Just because you're not involved doesn't mean it doesn't affect you negatively. And that shouldn't stop you from going and seeking help, because if you don't, that can fester and it could really leach into your life and in different aspects of your life. I really want to continue in talking about Diego and his legacy, but I think his legacy does live on in you, brother. And you're showing that, and his type of mentality you carry on with you, and you bring that into Blue Grit. So let's talk about Blue Grit Radio. Let's talk about Blue Grit Wellness. I mean, it's such a great platform and it's a great resource, and I think you guys need to check it out. You know, you're doing a great job in that field, but tell us about Blue Grit, brother.
Yeah, no, thank you. And just a quick point, I would say, like, not being there, like, I learned a lot about survivor's guilt because there are several of us from the crew, right? It became these nonsensical things, irrational things that that's often who's affected a lot, right? It's the non-shooter that's affected more than the shooter at
Right.
times. It's the person that wasn't on shift because they were visiting their family, and that happened in our group, right? Like, there's a dude that went home to visit his family, and he beat himself up because what if he was working? How would things maybe be different? Um, I remember hearing another friend that wasn't even scheduled to work and felt guilty because he recognized a little bit of, like, oh my gosh, I got a family at home, like, good thing it wasn't me. Oh my gosh, I'm a piece of crap because I'm now feeling grateful that it wasn't me. There's all these kind of really pervasive thoughts, and this comes up enough in my career with people that talk through their hard times with me, and a lot of times it's just the self blame it's the lack of self compassion. And oftentimes I found the best advice to reflect on is like, okay, what you're feeling, what you're telling yourself, what would you tell your buddy if they're saying that to you? Right. And that almost instantly people, it doesn't mean it goes away, but they recognize how irrational and unfair it is.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah, the survivor's guilt is real. Like, told myself I shouldn't have promoted because maybe I would have been the dog handler working, and how different would things be?
Right.
It's not fair. It doesn't even make sense. So,
Yeah, you can always Monday night quarterback yourself till you're blue in the face. It's not going to
yeah.
change anything.
Yeah, but Blue Grit. So really, it's a culmination of things, but it came up in 2020. Being such a hard time for law enforcement, I found at that time in my career, like, I was okay. Like, I was a supervisor, and I wasn't trying to work like undercover or anything, but I was okay, like, having some public reflections on policing, right? So I was on, like, Facebook or something, and I was already, like, I would kind of do some social media stuff just for, like, health and fitness, just to be helpful, and I'd get traction and just feedback on that. But on Facebook, kind of just saying, like, the nation's hurting. Law enforcement is certainly, like, beside ourselves, but the majority of us are, like, we're trying to do our thing. And I would just share, like, some frustrations, not politically, but just saying, like, it's hard, but, like, most of us that are here, we're trying to do our best, and we care about the community, we care about our families, we care about each other, and it's just hard. I got so much feedback from people, especially those that knew me before I was a cop and hadn't really kept in contact, as Facebook does. They're like, dude, you've always been you're like the most genuine, nice kid growing up. You've always been a good dude. We need more cops like you. And that was, like, a couple things. One, it was, like, supportive, but it was also frustrating because I felt like a bit of a slap in the face because, I serve with so many men and women that they are people like me, almost all of them, right?
Right.
Like, and many selfless, I would say, like, better than me because they are more tireless and they're more selfless than I am. So that just mobilized this need to, like, offer another perspective of, like, humanizing the badge, um, and providing, positive information in the veins of, as I said, like, physical and mental health, and destigmatizing and doing kind of supportive messaging with peer support. So that's really where Blue Grit Wellness started, as, like, Instagram page and website with a little blog. And then since then, like, because I was proficient, and I suppose I was just enough to be dangerous, as we say in the industry, like, with social media, when we recognized we needed to totally revamp our recruiting efforts just because things were so dismal, I was kind of trying to craft that role for somebody else, and she attrited from the department. And so I kind of felt like I was left holding the bag with one of my bosses. And so they opened it up, and I was like, I don't know if I'm the guy. I don't know if I can be the guy, but I have this seemingly impossible job of staffing up our department, and I'm going to go down swinging. So that is, in essence, in some ways, is where I had the confidence and the desire to build a podcast alongside this, because we just saw the value in having like these organic, long form conversations, just like what worked best for recruiting for us. A huge piece of it was just giving people time and letting them learn about you, right? So sitting down with an applicant or a prospect for like 30, 40 minutes and just talking about life or career, why not have a conversation on that, right? So, shout out to the police applicant podcast. Like Ken had us on to talk specifically about recruiting for our PD. And then it was scary for sure, right? Like
Right.
oh my God, I'm being recorded every word. But then that gave me the confidence to do exactly what you guys did, in the last little bit, which is just to like dive in and just be a student. Like, let's just throw ourselves at this process and this project, and um, be humble and be hungry and curious, and just throw yourself at it, and just see where it goes and grows.
It's awesome, man. So I do want to ask, what's been your favorite part about starting this journey with Blue Grit?
Yeah, my favorite part is probably just I feel very humbled and grateful to connect with really great people and like really beautiful souls and like sharp, intellectual like experts in whatever, right? Whether it's first responder or like health space or just leadership. Um, I feel in some ways like I get to be I get to be right there just picking brains and not feel selfish about it, because literally the whole point is like I get to learn and then share it. And I know that so many people get to learn now, like at scale. Like, a lot of people get to meet and get to know you both from being on my show, and otherwise like they might have never gotten to learn your story and what wisdom you have to offer, and then find yours, right? So connecting, making the world, this huge world, feel a bit smaller is really really rewarding, because we're 2 time zones away, but like there's so much overlap in our experience and insight, and just recognizing like how we can be positive and constructive, because it takes so much effort to do that, and it's more necessary than ever, just because the negativity is just, that's just our default. We're just going to start sliding there. We're going to let the loud voices, the angry voices kind of dominate if we don't like keep them in check or drown them out with this positivity.
Right.
Yeah, man. Very well said. I mean, I couldn't say it better myself. You knocked it out of the park. Is there a guest or someone that you had brought on your show that really kind of like sticks out to you or resonates with you from their message?
Mm, this is good. You stole that question.
Hey, you learn a little bit from everyone you meet.
He's turning the
It's
tables.
like I feel like if I pulled up the roster right now, I'd be like, oh, this one or that one, or like
Right.
you know, I think one. Okay, This is where I'm gonna land. Is local cop. I've known him. He's now retired. But he retired as a sergeant, and I'd known him kind of cursory, like neighboring city. Didn't know him super well, but always just got this great vibe from him, and he has the credibility and the trust and the respect of everyone, because he's just an absolute brainiac, right? So the guy is Chris Nielsen. He was he was an attorney, and then he became a cop and SWAT dude, and just like so measured and so like cognitive. Like I think he's one of the most brilliant people I've met, like personally, but just so humble at the same time. But just to listen and hear, because he's not on social media like doing this kind of thing.
Right.
He hasn't written a book. That's not his thing. But everyone that's come to know him has gotten so much from him, right? Mentorship and all this, and he came from like nothing. He dad was not in his life. Mom was like teen pregnancy kind of thing, and he had all the deck perhaps like stacked against him. But early on in his life, he saw like someone he knew go to law school. He's like, well, shoot, like how hard is law school? Like
Right.
if he can do it, I can do it. And then this positive thinking and this notion of dreaming big. Like I see how he's raising his kids from a little bit of a distance. But his kids are like teenagers, and he's crushing it. And now he's back into law consulting. And so I'm like, what a fantastic like energy and example
Right.
to not limit yourself. And I know we talked a lot about that with mindset, but maybe, I mean, that is who comes to mind as far as like the everyday guy that's certainly not the everyday guy, but we can
Yeah.
all learn a lot from him. And maybe because of that, like however many people across the nation or beyond can learn about him and take that lesson, whereas otherwise I don't know that they'd be able to access him because I don't think he's been on any other podcasts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man. And there's something to be said about the trials and tribulations you go through in life. I think it really molds you into who you are. And it sounds like that's what happened to that guy. I mean, the odds in the hindsight, right, were stacked against him. And look where he became, where he went from nothing to something. And people look up to him and look to him for guidance.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
So
Yeah, like I got to know him better, before like through work and kind of doing similar roles and training sergeant and all that, like picking brains and just to connect with him and just to be able to share that example, super rewarding.
Oh, I bet. He sounds like a pretty cool dude.
I was gonna say, it sounds like someone we might have to have on the show if he's
Yeah.
willing to do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I'll send you the episode.
Yeah, please do. Well, brother.
I got
Oh yeah, absolutely. Please.
just one last parting question before we go. Kind of 2-part here. First off, where can people find you? Where you, all your Blue Grit or Blue Grit Radio, Blue Grit Wellness, and then where do you see your brand going?
Oh man, the first part's easy. We'll start there. So bluegritwellness.com. If you log in or you log in, if you dial that up, you'll see a prompt for a free newsletter. So that's my newest thing and that encapsulates some things that I'm working on. The recent podcast episodes, which is Blue Grit Radio. So that's on Apple, Spotify, all of them, as well as like Instagram, which is Blue Grit Wellness. And so those are the main things. I write for Police One, and so I'm continuing like just trying to. My goal is like serve the need, and that evolves, and it evolves because of me, and it evolves because of the landscape or environment that I'm in. And so maybe that goes into the next question, like what's next is to be determined. I'm a huge fan of the concept of like role over rank, and for me, it's like where do I feel like I can do the most good, and I know that's super subjective and there's a lot of ways that we can manipulate that. But what I'm trying to invite myself to do, and maybe those that are intrigued by this notion, is like, I am finding and trying to refine like how I am going to be my most authentic self and my most genuine self. Like keep building on all my strengths and, of course work on my weaknesses, but become more of like who I am, like kind of deep down inside, rather than adding on all this stuff that's not me. I think it's how we show up better as who we're supposed to be, how we show up better as leaders. And so, if that means promoting, then cool. If that means staying where I'm at, then cool. I don't know how long you guys asked me, like off, I think off recording, but like how long I have in law enforcement. I don't know. If you told me definitively I'd have like a 30+ year career and you'd be happy, I'd be like, cool, let's go. But if you said like, hey, you're not going to make it to 30 years, but you're going to do something else awesome, then I release and I would be like, cool, let's go. And I think that is a conversation, especially with your guys' story. Like we need to be aware of that and not afraid of it. We need to prep for it mentally before everything else. And so I I think I'm going to go where I need to go and grow Blue Grit in the way it needs to go, which the metaphor I've said early on was like, it's a vehicle. I don't know exactly where it's going. But the journey is in essence kind of that, and not over planning or preparing and just being along for the ride.
Yeah, baby, drive that car until it runs out of gas, my man. You're,
Man.
and I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. It truly was an honor having you on the show. Your mentality, your outlook on life, your leadership abilities, where you continue to better yourself every single day. I'm telling you, man, you're really emulating your top guests that you have had on, and I guarantee more than just Carrie and I see that. And I'm sure the guys that you lead, the guys at your department, the people that listen to your podcast, you're definitely an inspiration, man. And we would love to keep working with you in the future. You're definitely an asset to us, just with your mentality in general. You make me want to continue doing this. You make me want to continue bettering myself as a person. I'm sure Carrie feels similar. Dude, you're a rock star, brother. And I do mean that from the bottom of my heart. You're definitely the type of people that I like to surround myself with. So We appreciate you coming on the show, brother. Do you have anything else? Any last words of wisdom for the audience before you take off?
Only that I reciprocate the feeling. I've said it before, but I'll say it for your audience specifically. Like you guys are on a path, and you have your purpose and your belief, and it's really rewarding. Like I know that scheduling is always a thing with busy dudes and conflicts. I'm very grateful that this worked out after kind of having this little brainchild of this idea when to collaborate. But I would love to continue, and I'm excited to see where you guys go. You guys are going places. It's gonna be awesome.
Thanks, man. We hope so, and we hope same for you, buddy. I just want to leave the audience with one last thing. So I know Eric here, as we've talked, he's on Instagram, Blue Grit Wellness and Blue Grit Radio. Blue Grit Wellness is nothing but just phenomenal little tidbits of inspiration and insight into him and his mentality, and I've thoroughly enjoyed consuming his content, I'll say. And then listen to his podcast, Blue Grit Radio. It's Spotify, Apple, right?
Yep, all the players.
Yeah. So
yeah, you guys do yourself a favor, check them out. You will not be disappointed, I promise you. We appreciate you guys for tuning in for this episode. We can't do this without you guys. Please like, subscribe, share, and tune into the next episode. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, man.